When you send your soldiers off to fight a war, you send them out to a marching theme to make them inspired and fit for fight.
And before we enter the stage, we do the same.
If war should break out, no one can estimate its duration or see when it will end. The greatest powers of Europe, which are armed as never before, will fight each other. Gentlemen, it might be a 7 or even a 30 years war, but woe to him who sets Europe alight and first throws the match into the powder barrel. General Helmut von Moltke. From the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Europe relied on a certain balance of power. No nation was to rise too high above the others. Various sets of alliances were pitted against each other to keep the peace. The purpose was to prevent another great European war from happening. There were smaller conflicts, sure, but the first real damage to the system was done by the Franco-Prussian War in 1870 and 71. The decisive victory of the North German Federation over France had not only caused a lot of resentment, but the subsequent unification of the German Empire disturbed the overall power balance. The next dent was made by the decline of the Ottoman Empire. As it lost its influence in Europe, a power vacuum followed. Both Austria-Hungary and Tsarist Russia saw their spheres of influence clash with the nationalist ambitions of the Balkans. Now, to consolidate Germany's position in Europe, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck had actually tried to establish a League of Three Emperors between the rulers of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia, but the irreconcilable power struggle between Vienna and St. Petersburg over the Balkans tore the alliance apart. During the Bulgarian crisis of 1888, Bismarck had warned that such a conflict in the Balkans would one day plunge Europe from Moscow to the Pyrenees and from the North Sea to Palermo into a war whose issue no man can foresee. At the end of the conflict, we should scarcely know why we had fought. As long as cooler heads prevailed, though, Europe remained at peace. At least formally, because by the turn of the 20th century, each great power was already deeply committed to an arms race of unprecedented proportions. Each economy spent enormous parts of its GDP on the mass production and development of rifles, artillery, military equipment. Armament industries built gigantic siege guns, while military wharfs welded huge pieces of sheet metal for the production of warships. Each new technological breakthrough was immediately evaluated for possible military use. Aircraft, airships, submarines, gas. Which of those things would play a role in the coming war? At the same time, none of the military thinkers thought that warfare would fundamentally change. New technologies like the machine gun or barbed wire were certainly useful, but in the end, it would come down to the power of concentrated rifle fire and cold steel, right? Each training field saw the soldiers of Europe march in closed ranks, tight formations. In squares and lines they stood, with long glittering bayonets fixed, prepared to fend off cavalry attacks. Officers were sent to fencing school to practice elegant moves, while cavalrymen demonstrated their skills riding through woods and meadows at high speed. While the armies drilled, the powder keg grew dangerously closer to being ignited. The 19-teens saw several crises between the major powers, and the saber-rattling grew louder. The Balkan Wars further fueled nationalistic tensions until the assassination of Austrian Archduke Franz Ferdinand by the Bosnian Serb Gavrilo Princip finally set the world ablaze. Austria has sent a bullying and humiliating ultimatum to Serbia, who cannot possibly comply with it, and demanded an answer within 48 hours, failing which she will march. This means almost inevitably that Russia will come to the scene in defense of Serbia and in defiance of Austria. And if so, it is difficult for Germany and France to refrain from lending a hand to one side or the other, so that we are in measurable or imaginable distance of a real Armageddon. Sir Herbert Asquith. It is a myth, which is sadly still widely repeated, that Europe went to war in those days cheering, laughing, and celebrating. Sure, there were the occasional chauvinistic slogans, but overall, the people were stunned to silence. The propaganda was quick to show men laughing and waving in railway cars with signs saying, "To Paris," or See you in Berlin. But the general public was not in the mood for such slogans. Instead, there was a certain diligence with which the men followed their officers to the barracks or into the field. It was simply a call to duty, bound to an underlying cultural obligation which was expected by state and society, the sort of defensive patriotism that urged every man to do his part for emperor, king, and country. On the night of August 1st, 1914, 4 days after Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, no music was being played in Paris. People who were still awake and watching from the windows were not singing or cheering as the soldiers marched by. There was no great enthusiasm as the columns crossed the Boulevard du Palais. Instead, it was a gloomy, almost oppressive atmosphere. Only the sound of heavy marching boots, followed by the noise of horses and motor vehicles pulling artillery pieces from the capital, was to be heard. Over the coming days, the French soldiers marched in their bright red trousers and large dark blue coats to the assembly areas. Veterans of the War of 1870 stood by, waving banners and singing songs about the coming recapture of lost Alsace-Lorraine. Their government had promised there would be no second Sedan, but instead it would be revenge for the humiliation at the hands of the Prussians. In St. Petersburg, the Tsar appeared at the windows of his palace and held a speech in front of his favorite Cossacks. He spoke of the coming peril, the victory that was at hand, and the honor of the coalition. Tsar Nicholas had been a fairly weak monarch, unable to win the love of his countrymen, and yet the war was a way to demonstrate his power and his ability to lead the country to greatness. In just a few days, the large Russian armies would sweep into East Prussia and towards Berlin. Russian officers predicted it might take 3 or 4 months until they rode through the Brandenburg Gate. Anyone who thought it would take more than that was a pessimist and a defeatist. However, most of the common soldiers and sailors that were marching to their posts in those days knew very little of what was going on. Many thought they might be sent towards Mongolia or maybe Crimea. The quarrels with Austria-Hungary about Serbia made little sense to them. In Vienna, Field Marshal Franz Conrad von Hötzendorf gave his field commanders their final instructions for the coming punishment expedition against Serbia. This was not to be a fight between two great powers. Rather, the Austro-Hungarian army would enter a country full of brigandage and irregular fighters. No pardon was to be given against such banditry, and any acts of resistance were to be suppressed with harsh brutality. Serbia was to be a short campaign, and then they would move east to meet the Russian hordes in the fields of Galicia. Once more, the war would unite the many people of the empire to a common cause, and victory would strengthen the monarchy for ages to come. In Berlin, the Kaiser had donned his best parade uniform and spoke in front of the Reichstag that the time had come to fight. He promised them they would all be back before the leaves fell. The German war plan was simple, yet bold and ruthless. Based on decades of studies and calculations, they had planned a massive revolving wheel effect. While the French eagerly would push towards Alsace-Lorraine, the German armies would swing around towards Paris in one giant push from the north. All they needed was to cross Belgian territory as quickly as possible. The German Empire had been growing by 1 million people each year, but though its massive armies would be able to fight France or Russia separately, the idea of a two-front war was troubling. Everything relied on their strict timetable. If Belgium chose not to allow them through, then Belgium would be crushed. Neutrality be damned. Necessity knows no law. In Brussels, the Belgian king looked with concern on the escalating situation on his borders. Belgium had neglected its army because there was little sense even trying to compete with the major powers. But caught between France and Germany was like being caught between the hammer and the anvil. Still, King Albert chose to mobilize. Belgium was small, but it would not forsake honor by allowing the German army to disrespect the borders. The country stood fully behind its king. In London, the situation was not as clear-cut. Britain was watching from the sidelines, unsure if they should intervene or not. It had always been a naval power, and its duty lay with its empire, not with France or Germany. Yet, what would happen if Germany won? What would happen to the rest of Europe, to Belgium, Denmark, and Holland in a Germany-dominated mainland, especially with Germany also having the world's second largest navy? Downing Street was torn between liberal and conservative politicians who talked of honor, obligation, and self-interest. It all came down to Germany's plans to move through Belgium. This was an obvious threat to Great Britain's interests, and if Germany would not refrain from violating Belgian neutrality, there would be war. When the powder keg exploded in 1914, no one believed in nor had prepared for a long war. Until September, maybe 6 or 8 weeks. Then they would be in either Paris or in Berlin. 6 million men marched off to war. Millions more waited as reserves, and replacements were trained in the barracks, ready to be sent off to the front. Next to the howitzers, the heavy guns, and the field cannon rode the proud squadrons of Europe's cavalrymen. Like the Magyars of old, the Uhlans and Hussars of Austria-Hungary took the field. German dragoons paraded in front of the Kaiser at the Reichstag, while Russia's fierce hordes of Cossacks galloped over the wide plains in the east. French cuirassiers would relive old glory, clad in iron armor and plumed helmets. Altogether, they represented the cream of Europe's military class. They were the sons of an age-old tradition, not just the mobile arm of the army, but the embodiment of a military caste that held high the ideals of their nations. The same went for the tens of thousands of infantry officers who proudly marched in front of their men, leading them into the coming battle. The sense of tragic futility of it will never quite fade from the minds of those who saw these brave men dashing across the open to the sound of bugles and drums, clad in the old red caps and trousers which a parsimonious democracy dictated they should wear, although they turned each man into a target. The gallant officers who led them were entirely ignorant of the stopping power of modern firearms, and many of them thought it chic to die in white gloves. Sir Edward Spears. It was all a glorious dream, that march to war. Modern war killed that dream in mere days. Okay, at the very beginning, you said that you guys do the same as these marches leading men off to war. Can you explain for everyone out there what you mean?
How to start a show?
Yeah,
it's very important. I mean, you have iconic, superior show starters that we all grew up with, and I can relate to when some of my first concerts, I was at the Kiss, and you hear the "All right, Stockholm, you wanted the best, you got the best," and that was like, wow. Now I get excited and pumped up, and then it became more and more bands who started to use symphonic intros, and as power metal was rising, more and more symphonic introductions reminding you about epic stories and epic battles and stuff. And this is something we also took to us with Sabaton. Over the years we have had a couple of different, and actually at one of the very, very, very first concerts we ever did as a band, I remember we didn't have anything pre-recorded, but Joachim was walking up, he was playing keyboards by then.
Yeah.
So he was walking up alone, and then he was taking his keyboard, and then he played the Terminator 2 theme. I
got, for some reason, it suddenly got into my head, and he played like the Beverly Hills Cop theme. I'm like, that would not be such an inspiring beginning, would it?
No, not so. But then we were like, wow, we wanted to play something that was powerful, and we liked it. Yeah. We felt good about it, and the audience thought it was cool. And after that, we have changed the song quite a lot. But for quite some time, the song or the little intro we created, as we are calling the March to War, has been used for this. And I don't know how many millions of fans around the world who have been pumped up to a Sabaton show to the sound of this.
Yeah.
And
well, you guys, more than perhaps any other band, should have the March to War as your thing. You write, occasionally you write songs about military history, like one or two of them.
I mean, we like sometimes to see our shows as a kind of a peaceful and happy battle,
Yeah.
And but there is no enemies. That's the whole idea of a Sabaton show. Everybody should walk away there and just be united with everybody else and with us. But we want to encourage the spirit of everybody to feel a part of something. We're going to something and the introduction is a very powerful part of the show.
But that is you're doing actually what marches to war were ideally designed to do. Because when you send your boys off marching to war, hooray, we're all in this together. Come on, boys, let's do it for motherland, fatherland. Hooray, we're going to fight, we're going to win. Of course, the other side is doing exactly the same. And, like at the beginning of the First World War, the Germans were going to march. They were saying, when the British army comes, we're just going to use the police and arrest them. And the French were saying, the Germans are going to fall over in 2 weeks. Somebody has to be wrong.
Somebody has to be wrong.
In that case, everybody was wrong. But nobody thinks they're wrong. But you guys, since you have no enemies, it works out like that.
Yeah.
Now who wrote your march?
It was written by Joachim.
Aha, okay.
Yeah.
And
it's a specific part of music written for exactly the purpose of starting a show.
Yeah. Does he ever consider playing it live on keyboard, or does you just have it?
No, but we have been discussing to perhaps look into creating a full song about it.
Okay.
If it is possible, I don't know, but it's a good theme and could be maybe something done with it.
Some of these, let's say, fragments of songs, or they're not full Sabaton songs. These are many of my favorite episodes to do because it's not always exactly clear where you're going with it and why you're going with it and stuff.
I mean, when we were discussing all the tracks that we're gonna do, and then we come into the March to War, and it's like it feels a little bit insignificant compared to some of the other tracks,
right?
Because but this one is about this story and that story. But then we were discussing, and this the March to War has been heard by a lot of Sabaton fans.
Yeah.
Because it's been there, and
that's true.
And it has a really the story behind it and what it means is more powerful than some of the full songs that we have covered.
I think so. I agree with you. Now, would you be able to estimate roughly how many shows you've used this march for since you started it?
Roughly 1,000.
Okay, that's a lot of shows. Oh,
From the super small ones to the biggest ones we've done.
And do you want to know something? As far as I'm aware, because people ask us do an episode on this. Like, can you do Cliffs of Gallipoli? Can you do Ghost Division? I don't think anyone asked us to do this song.
No, that's true.
That's a little unfair. There's something wrong with you guys. There's something wrong with you guys.
Something wrong with you guys.
You can edit that out, right? No, you can't edit. You can't edit. So that's gonna stay in. Me insulting the audience. That's gonna stay in. That's okay for ever. Okay, with some kind of cool effect. Okay, cool.
Sorry.
Okay, well, no, but I really like doing these half songs because I think it takes the show somewhere where people don't expect it to go.
Definitely, and it ended up in a place. Now we have inspired people, right?
Yeah, totally. We have inspired people. People are gonna go back and listen to it now.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy the song. Enjoy the show.
Yeah.
That starts like this.
That starts like this. Well, that's it for today from Sabaton History Channel.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for watching, and thank you everybody for supporting. And those who don't do it, click the bell, subscribe, and become a patron. Thank you very much.